The Riddle of the American Sphinx Part 1. Give it an inch and it will take a mile is a very old saying, so given enough times, anything can happen. They both apply to sand in the desert. When I was in college, I had a love for archaeology and archaeology, so I studied and went to places that haven't been touched by man for some time. I wanted to have stories to tell my children around the campfire or late at night, that is if I ever had them. When a person talks about the desert, images of a little man walking on top of the sand in an hourglass comes to mind as each of us are trapped and running out of time. This place of mystery covers its tracks very well. History gets covered up by sand and mud only to be forgotten about until a curious soul like myself stumbles upon it. I found something amazing out there, something that took me to other places to see things hidden from men for reasons unknown to me at the time. If I told you right now, you wouldn't believe me. I could show you or even let you talk with him, but you like many others would have questions he would not want to answer. You see, we were many years before the change, we're ready for the answers, but now after the sand has covered up the history of all, we're not ready for the truth. In Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas the scouring mix of sand and winds inexorable expanding the plains deserts. One day the United States will become a mirror image of Egypt and there's not much we can do about it. Our skyscrapers and tallest buildings will look on long after we are gone. Generations will think they are tombs because inside they will find bones and things we used in life just as we found in the pyramids. I can assure you we have got much of the history of the world wrong. How do I know? You might ask. Not because I dreamed it, but because I saw it. I walked the same paths of men in the sandy dunes of time. In Sonora, Mexico, some patches of these waterless, nearly lifeless deserts are more than 40 miles in diameter. Barbed wire fence rows, oriented at right angles to the flight trajectory of the prevailing winds, providing just enough friction to slow the creep of sand. Eventually, some of them are entirely covered over, leaving long, mysterious-looking windows of sand. Windows one could look through to see how the world would be and the other worlds that will come to pass. Once we came across an abandoned homesteader's house in Cimarron County, Oklahoma. In that state's panhandle. It was a poignant place, possibly a relic of the Dust Bowl days. The remnants of a decaying picket fence, nearly and nicely buried by partially stabilized sand, were visible on one side, and a depression in the rear was, we deduced, the old well site. The roof was entirely gone, as were most of the walls, but strangely the old plank flooring was intact. A rear entrance penetrated into the basement, half full of sand. It reminded us as we looked around of how the tombs must have looked before the sand was cleared. As we inched closer to the basement, along the walls written in red was the words "To know the future, look for the past." Under the words was a strange symbol, a circle, an eye, and the letter A hidden behind the eye. Even as we briefly explored its semi-darkened confines, a fine trickle of sand dripped through the cracks, making a small vortex at our feet. I was left to wonder, when they discovered King Tut's tomb, as they broke the door ignoring the curse, did they see the same vortex of sand filling places it could not get to until then? My stepfather once said, "A man would go mad if he thinks too much. The more you think about the world and how it has changed, can lead you down a path of madness. The truth of man will kill you, possess you, and once it has its hooks in you it will pull you along as if you were a fish caught on the fisherman's hook. This is my warning to you, one that would be lost to time and in the sand one day, but still, it's a warning, just not one that was written on the wall. My name is Dr. Zachariah Fry and I have much to tell you." The little house that was covered in sand, that place gave me the creeps. I felt as if I was intruding on the dead. That was not the first time I had succumbed to that feeling. Once before, at a kiva in New Mexico, not one of the antiseptic reconstruction types encountered at parks and national monuments. The real ones, are real places and have a special type of earth magic about them, a combination of smells, sounds almost alchemical to the mind. I had felt that way, the way I felt before, as if I was walking on the dead. It was on a low, rubble-strewn hillock south of Chaco Canyon. The hot late evening wind blew steadily from the southwest, making small, mournful sounds. Sometimes they would remind me of a funeral for a faceless friend. A large circle of stones, 20 feet or more across, lay exposed at the edges only. The whole thing was covered with sand and debris, but I knew it was a vanquished kiva. What lay inside, I wondered? Pots? Shards? Maybe a skeleton or two. According to one of my instructors, giants walked the earth long before man did. He was laughed off the stage at the Smithsonian during one of his speeches. After that he wasn't the same person and took off to New Mexico to prove his theories. He was never heard from again. The drifting sand had entombed the answers. Only a few shards of polychrome pottery said that yes, people had lived here as surely as it was going eventually to entomb that cellar in Oklahoma. The wind wailed and I shivered under its preternatural caress. The cold air can make a man meek and humble, it can make him think about his family and feel the pain that he hasn't felt. So I sat down on a sandstone. Bits of it crumbled off and fell to the ground. Was my addition to the desert sand an act of nature, or was it symptomatic of a man in the arid lands? For a moment I thought as the wind whipped my face, out here when the wind picks up and grabs handfuls of sand to toss at you, it can feel like hundreds of tiny bee stings. The natives used the wind to make hides and leathers strong. As they would dry and as the sand would whip against them at night, they would act as drums and almost play a song. The sand, the wind, and the desert were making me strong like the leather. It wanted to hear my song. Perhaps we should have never come here. I lit a cigarette and watched the slow, brilliant setting of the sun, thinking about how close it looks yet it is so far away. As I dropped the cigarette and ground it out under my heel, I started to see a delicate arrowhead resting atop a pedestal of sand. Perfect in every way, the bird's point was only about half an inch in length. The flake marks were so minute, so exact, that the maker had to have been a perfectionist, and along the back was that strange symbol, an eye hidden in a circle and marked with the letter A. As if nature needed to remind me that I had been here far too long, I heard the sound of a thunderhead booming overhead. The weather in the desert can be a funny thing, it warm, then cold, and then it storms, bringing light and rain, a form of wet, cold hellfire. I once was trapped under a thunderhead, lightning strikes hitting the ground making fulgurites, explosions of sand and glass all around me. The light from the lightning would hit the tiny glass particles, turning them into exotic prisms. Rainbows would shine in the darkness as mental fear took over, caused by a light show from the satanic fairy dust. Before the storm took us, I placed the arrowhead safely in my cigarette package. For many years it has rested in a place of honor with some other treasures from past adventures in a small compote on a coffee table in my living room. Sometimes I would show it to visitors and they would marvel at its perfect, diminutive form. Sometimes they would even ask if it was real. I would say it's real, all right, but what else? The symbol had a way of possessing the holder of the arrowhead with wonder and curiosity, especially after I would tell them the other parts of the story.